Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be going over Tropical Storm Elsa, which has weakened since yesterday because it is moving over some of the Caribbean islands. It might strengthen a little bit more before it heads into Florida, and then eventually it'll be riding up the east coast as a weak or moderate tropical storm. So we're going to be talking about all of that and more in today's video, so make sure you're staying tuned all the way until the end. Taking a look at the current National Weather Service page, you can see that we have a few excessive heat warnings in parts of Montana, as well as some scattered heat advisories throughout the northwest and the northern plains. We also have some red flag warnings in eastern Idaho, and other than that, we don't have many other watches or warnings currently in place. Yesterday, we had a high temperature 4 miles northwest of Topeka, Arizona of 115 degrees, with a low temperature in Peterson, Utah of 32 degrees Fahrenheit. The highest rainfall report was in Prairieville, Louisiana, where they got 5.36 inches of rainfall, and there were no snowfall reports as of yesterday. Taking a look at the current surface plot of Tropical Storm Elsa, you can see it's located at 18.3 degrees north by 76.2 degrees west. Maximum winds of 65 miles per hour with a minimum pressure of 1,007 millibars, moving west-northwest at 13 miles per hour. So it has slowed down quite significantly, and that's actually a good sign for this storm to weaken because it was going very fast over the open waters, meaning that it didn't have enough time to really develop. And now that it's over the land masses, it is kind of slowing down a little bit, meaning that it is able to weaken for a longer period of time. So luckily, that is something good that happened out of the storm. The weakening of the storm is going to take much longer than the strengthening of the storm did while it was still in the open water. So that's definitely a good sign. It's right north of Jamaica by this point. It'll probably be just over central Jamaica by the next update of this surface plot. If we take a look at the current satellite imagery, you can see that you would think that the storm center would be somewhere right in here. In reality, it's over here, just because of how the storm is set up right now. So it is a little bit off of where it should be. The upper air center again is right in here, and then the surface center is just a little bit further to the northwest. Other than that, we don't have many other storms going on in the Caribbean or the southern Gulf of Mexico. So the Gulf of Mexico is wide open for this storm. It will have to pass over some higher terrain, which is located in southern Cuba, parts of Jamaica, also for parts of southern Haiti as well. So we are going to be dealing with a few areas of mountainous terrain, and these three areas could definitely help break apart a small storm like Tropical Storm Elsa. Taking a look at the current watches and warnings for the Caribbean, you can see that we have a few tropical storm watches for the lower Florida Keys, also for western Cuba and a little bit of the islands south of Cuba. We have hurricane watches, which are up for eastern Cuba, and then on top of there, we have tropical storm warnings, which are up for the entirety of Jamaica, parts of Haiti, and then also for much of eastern and central Cuba. And you can see that that tropical storm force wind mass is just kind of a big circle, and it does go out fairly far away from the center. So it is starting to grow a little bit in size, but it is definitely weakening in terms of the actual wind speeds. Taking a look at the key messages now, I'm not going to read them out for you guys, but if you want to, you can pause the video right here and read them for yourself. Mainly, they're just talking about potentially some flooding and storm surge in parts of southern Florida due to the storm, and also the potential for this to bring tropical storm conditions or maybe even category 1 hurricane conditions if this is able to strengthen once more. Here's a look at the cone track of this, and you can see that it's currently located again in eastern Jamaica. That'll be moving to the northwest into parts of western Cuba, so it will directly miss parts of eastern Cuba with the higher terrain, but it will still affect that area. So we will still see some impacts from the area, and the higher terrain in eastern Cuba will still play a part in weakening this storm. It might be able to strengthen a little bit within this area, so this is where it might potentially go back up to Category 1 status, although I don't think that's too likely as of right now. It then will move over the coastal Carolinas and then eventually off the shore of the mid-Atlantic. We're not expecting too many impacts if you live along the East Coast. It should be a weak enough storm by that point, so we're not expecting anything too major in those areas. Taking a look at the track forecast, we only have a few models that are currently rendered in, but you can see that we have two outlier models going to the west and one outlier going to the east, and then the rest of the models are in a fairly tight track here, where most of them bring this up through the west side of Florida into parts of the Carolinas, and then eventually through the mid-Atlantic coastal waters. So we have a fairly agreed upon track over many of these models, although again we still have to really track and see if any of these outlier models on either side of the storm are actually going to occur. Because if that does happen, if we get something crazy to happen like that, then the forecast pretty much is turned upside down, and the intensity of the storm could definitely change rather quickly. Taking a look at the intensity guidance, and you can see most of the models have this on a slow decline in strength down to tropical depression status, and then eventually even further down than that. So it is expected to gradually become a weak tropical storm, even a tropical depression, over the next 72 to about 120 hours. Here's a look at the flash flooding risk over the next 3 days. And you can see it's not a huge risk, but over much of Florida and a little bit of Georgia, we have a 10% slight risk of flash flooding. So it's not, again, it's not a huge risk, but definitely still something that you want to pay attention to. We could still see some isolated flash flooding here and there. Taking a look at the total rainfall from the Weather Prediction Center, we're expecting 4 to 6 inches if you live along southwestern Florida. The rest of the western half of Florida is expected to see about 2 to 4 inches of rainfall, including the Florida Keys. And then if you live in northern or eastern Florida, we're looking at less than 2 inches of total rainfall out of this event over the next 3 days. And again, we could still see some added rainfall after that 3-day mark. So again, we'll still have to continue to track some of the flash flooding risks with this. We do have a storm surge risk, especially in the lower Florida Keys, where we have a 1 to 2 foot storm surge risk. It's not going to be a ton, but you still do need to pay attention to this because this could cause some issues, especially considering that the Florida Keys are basically just at sea level. We don't have really any elevation change, and if anything, they're actually a little bit in some parts of the islands below sea level. So that could definitely cause some issues, especially for this area, which is very, very prone to flash flooding, especially from hurricanes, just because of how they're geographically set up. Looking at the setup in the upper parts of the atmosphere for the storm, something that really kind of caught my eye is that you can see that the surface plot of the storm is right here. So here's the surface plot of the storm, and then you look at the upper air setup. We're just looking at the relative humidity, but you can look at any other parameter, and you'd still see this. We have your actual upper air setup of this low pressure to the south. So we are dealing with some wind shear from the south, where we are dealing with this storm kind of getting a little bit dislocated, and I think that's one of the reasons that it did actually weaken a little bit more. And if we look at another factor here, looking at the broader upper air pattern over the Atlantic and especially the Caribbean, you can see that we have a high pressure which is to the east, but it is impacting this storm quite significantly. We have another high pressure which is starting to develop, and that is going to be just southwest of Florida. This will move away a little bit, but this storm will still have to contend with this, and that's one of the reasons that this is moving a little bit slower now. The storm has to kind of go against this big high pressure to the north, so because of that, it will kind of slow down to prepare for that. And then also, just looking at the flow in the upper air, you can see that we're looking at a stream of flow somewhat like this. So it's kind of going right over the storm with the upper air wind flow, and then if we look at to the south of there, it's also just kind of going right around there. So we don't have any of this kind of wrapping around on the southern end of the storm. It just kind of creates a little bump, and then it just kind of goes right over it. So we're not dealing with these winds coming out of the east and then kind of wrapping around the storm like that. And that's how you get a good developed storm. Instead, we're just getting this kind of flow over it and then just kind of leave it alone, and it's just kind of right in between the flow of the upper air winds. So kind of an interesting setup there, and I think that's one of the reasons that this is not developing as good as it was expected to before, because there isn't really any inflow of moisture coming out of the south, and that's what you would need, because of course the open waters over the southern Caribbean are very, very warm and have a lot of ocean heat content for this storm to kind of work with. So if you were to get a southerly flow into the system that could wrap around into the core, that could help this strengthen quite a lot. Luckily, we're not dealing with that, so this probably will weaken quite significantly as it goes over the Caribbean islands. So that's definitely a plus side to this. And then if we look at the aircraft recon from this storm, now this is just from this morning, so that we're not fully into the storm right now. We haven't gotten the full pass from this pass of the storm. But you can see that they have found at least tropical storm force winds to the far east of the storm, and I would be very interested to see what they find up here if they do another pass. And then if we look at the actual track to the right-hand side of your screen, it can just kind of give you a good idea of how they went through. So they kind of went in here, they did a few loops around, and then they went back out of the storm. So they're probably on their way out of the storm. If I had to guess right now, they're probably going to make another pass this afternoon, since they did one early this morning as well. Taking a look at the surface plot and surface sounding from the aircraft recon that we got, they dropped a sounding into the storm, and you can see that we do have a little bit of wind shear, and this is something that I was watching out for as they went through this pass. So you can see that we first started off with winds coming out of the southeast. So they were coming out of the southeast at rather high values, 27 knots, 29 knots, 36 knots. So they were coming out of the southeast rather fast. So that's definitely, if this were to stay stacked, that wouldn't have any impact on it. But because we're now dealing with a strong area of shear on the northern end, where this kind of tilted a little bit from southeast to south in wind direction, that is what's helping to break apart this system a little bit. And that's what you saw with the relative humidity map, where the actual center of the storm isn't completely over the upper air center. So that's what's causing this separation within the storm. Even though it looks like a small change, because this storm is so small in magnitude and so small in size, a little shift 20 or 30 miles dislocated from the surface and upper air centers of the storm could really cause an issue in this type of storm, and especially with tropical storm Elsa. So that is going to wrap it up for today's video. Please consider liking the video, subscribing, and turning on notifications, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.